Charisma Help Desk, Jonathan speaking. How can I help you? So if I understand, you've got a ghosting situation going on and you're finding it frustrating and you want to have a better feel for what's going on and what to do about that. Is that right? So there's a few things to understand about ghosting and they're very important. The probably maybe even before the first thing is the zeroth thing about ghosting. And that's that it's everyone's right. Just like you have a right to free speech and a right not to be compelled to make speech. Ghosting, not interacting, is a right that every person has. Nobody can make you interact. And likewise, you can't make anyone interact. And that's just a right that people have. Now, we also live in a society. So the fact that we are social creatures means that people's choice to exercise that right can have a strong impact on your psychological well-being. Now, beyond that zeroth thing about ghosting, the fact that you have a right not to respond and they have a right not to respond. And I assure you that if you're living a modern life, there are people that are trying to get a hold of you that you are not interacting with. You have ghosted probably hundreds of people. You may not know their names. In fact, you probably don't know many of their names. But whether it's in the form of phone calls and text messages, there are people who maybe even spent money to try to reach you. And you're not paying them any mind. And that's just part of life. There are people that you know how to deal with and people that you don't have a beneficial way to deal with. So the first thing to understand about ghosting is that the person that's ghosting you doesn't know how to deal with you at this point, or expects that they don't know how to deal with you at this point. It's basically a lack of skill. Now, if every piece of junk mail coming into your inbox was something that you had so much skill at that you know, even if you don't need a dentist, but there's a dental flyer and you had an idea what you could do with a dentist, even though you already have yours, then you would have enough skill to want to interact with that new dentist. Now, the same thing goes for people who are ghosting you. They don't have the skill to believe that they can profitably interact with you. Maybe it's they're running fear messages in their head about where the relationship is going. Maybe they're having an idea that that there has been a boundary violated and they don't know how to restore that. Maybe it's a problem with boundaries they normally have, where they don't set up boundaries, or they communicate boundaries in a different spot than their actual boundaries are. Lots of problems in that thing can happen. But the fundamental thing is to realize that if somebody's ghosted you, it's because they don't have the skill, the resources to interact with you at this time. Now, depending on the type of ghosting, what kind of story they're telling, it could be, and many times it is, they're just too busy. They may absolutely adore you and not know how to find time amongst their many challenging things they've got going on in their life to meaningfully interact with you. In fact, this is a problem that I've had myself, where people believe that I'm disrespecting them. And in truth, I'm trying to find enough time amongst my many things to give them an answer that is of the quality of the question they've given me. So simple questions I can get back to quickly. Complicated questions that are emotionally charged or delicate take longer to respond to, just because they require, I know I need more skill, I need more resources to respond. And that can be a thing that's going on. Now, that's one story that somebody who's ghosting might tell themselves is they just need more resource. They don't think of themselves as ghosting you. Now, there are people who may deliberately choose to ghost you. And they might be telling themselves a story that is that you're some sort of villain. You got your mustache and it's got that little twirl there. And in your mind, or in their mind, you've done something beyond the pale. You've basically violated a boundary. That's what being a villain really means. Is there some boundary they expected of you or of people in general? And very likely, if you violated that, well, it's possible that you knew it and violated it anyway. That's a choice that some people make, and you could have done that. Very likely, they failed to communicate that boundary clearly, and you violated it just by virtue of not knowing that could, maybe even that could be a boundary. Not only that it was, but maybe you've never seen such a boundary before. You're making your best guess at how to live through life, and you wandered straight across something they thought was important. It can happen. Now, they might tell themselves all sorts of stories. People are great at creating stories in their heads about what your behavior means, what that boundary violation means. And so they might decide that they're going to try to punish you. Now, punishment, typically, by and large, is, though it can be of use in some situations, by and large, the way it's mostly done by human beings is a terrible teacher. It's just absolutely dreadful. You can see that by just a simple look at the statistics for the U.S. justice system. It's a terrible teacher. But we try to use this punishment and reward system in so many areas of our life as popular behaviorism. And frankly, they work very poorly most places they're done. But trying to use the punishment system is an example of somebody who's not resourced enough to train you in what they needed. They may not even believe it's their job to help educate you on their boundaries. They probably have a belief that their boundaries are the only boundaries that matter. And it's a very self-centered sort of thing, but that's, they're locked in their own world. They believe everybody's world is just like theirs. And that's fine. It's very common. Don't worry about what kind of strange assumptions they've made about the world. You've probably come across a boundary of theirs if they're making this punishment judgment. And they may try to punish you just by not talking to you. They might try to punish you by additionally not talking to you and saying unkind things to other people. They may need to defend their choice not to talk to you to other people. And they will probably, just because people are very good at justifying their behaviors, create a story, cherry-picked, so to speak, from their observations of their life and their stories, for what you have done and what they have done, and back and forth. And it can get very elaborate, and nobody cares. I mean, people will be enthralled, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's just a story. Now, there's an important thing to know about ghosting, and it's that for ghosting to be a problem for you, there are two sides. One side is the other person not having the resources, whether that's time or energy or some other skill to interact with you the way that you want to be interacted with. Maybe it's around communicating their boundaries so that you unknowingly violated, whichever. The other side is you were attached. You really cared. And really caring in many ways can be very important. But don't get really caring completely mixed up with attachment. Now, they sound like they can be the same thing, but they're actually not quite. You can care deeply about what happens to people, that people do well in their life, that people have happiness. And you can also be unattached. You can absolutely wish that the kitty cats get petted, the children are fed, and that everybody has the best entertainment available. And if somebody doesn't, that doesn't mean it has to destroy your life. Knowing that there's somebody who's not having a great time doesn't have to impact your life. You can choose, and it's not uncommon to choose, emotionally choose, not necessarily logically choose, to bind yourself up in connection to how other people are enjoying their life. Um, but it's important to realize that it's 100% natural to find yourself attached, and that's 100% your side of things. It's not the other person's responsibility to look out for what's going on in you. They probably can't tell, even if they were in communication with you. They probably don't have the energy, the resources, the emotional or social skills to know what's going on with you. And quite frankly, if you don't have the skills to know what's going on with you, how is anybody else? Other than perhaps a trained professional, how is anybody else supposed to guess that? Well, even a trained professional is probably going to ask you a lot of questions, ask you to do all the heavy lifting to tell them what it is going on for you. So it's important to realize that there's this inside of you component. There's the I'm allowing what's going on with somebody else, whether somebody else is communicating with me, to affect my self-image, my sense of self-esteem, something like that. And that's the only way this can really disturb you. It's 100% natural. Don't worry about it if it's happened to you. It's not a defect. Just realize that it's not the best way to necessarily be. It's a very common way, especially in our society. But don't worry about it. It's realize that that is a thing that's happening in you, which means that you can fix this. It's a prompt for self-work. So if you're finding yourself just devastated, really obsessing, like thoughts you don't want about somebody who's, maybe you're idealizing them, if they're maybe a romantic sort of thing, or maybe you're demonizing if somebody has said something unkind to you, whatever the case. Realize that if that's going on, that there's something in you that it's stirred up. Now, yeah, there's outside behavior, and yeah, you can make judgments about it. But if there wasn't basically a vulnerability in you in that way, then you can't experience that suffering. Now, it's not a problem that you're suffering. I mean, it's a problem that you're suffering. It's not a weakness that you're suffering. That's being human. But it's also not fated. It's not destiny. Just because you've suffered one way doesn't mean that it's always going to be that way when somebody ignores you, that you're going to have a miserable time. No. You can actually learn from these situations. Now, tactically speaking, there's an important couple of ways to go about looking at what you want to learn from a ghosting situation. Now, the first thing is if somebody has ghosted you, they've kind of violated, you may have violated something that they thought was a contract. You probably didn't realize that you had a contract, boundaries that were important to you. That being, if you invest emotionally in somebody's life, you probably expect them to treat you a certain way. And if you're going to invest, you want them to reciprocally invest. If they're going to cut off communications, you want a warning. Hey, I'm going to be out of communication for 2 weeks. My grandmother dies. Just let me know. Hey, I can't. Whatever. But you have a boundary. And if this is an emotional problem for you, as in it hurts when you think about being ghosted, which is probably why you've asked the question, then you got to realize that if you let this person back in, they can do this behavior again. In fact, they've seen how well it works possibly. If it just absolutely drives you mad and they're still under the impression that perhaps, at least on some level, punishing you might be a good thing to do next time you misbehave in their mind, then they might do this again. They certainly did it once. And if that's going to be the case, you need to set really clear boundaries. You got to say, hey, this is my boundary. If we're going to do this thing, whether it's a romance thing or a friend thing or a business partner thing or whatever sort of thing, then I need this to be true. I need to know that you're going to be with me, like you're not going to cut off communication. I need to know that, I understand that you can't answer the phone every time, but I don't expect to go more than a week without my calls being returned. Something like that. You got to negotiate what your boundaries are. You set your boundaries, negotiate that they can be understood. If maybe you've set a boundary that's unrealistic, negotiate that with them so that you come to an understanding. Make it explicit. If this is hurting you, if this is disturbing your peace, make it explicit. Like, hey, I'm happy to get back together. Like, I'm happy to pick back up where we left off. But I need things to be a little bit different. And you can, that's a great time while you're setting up that to set up other things. Like if this went wrong for some reason that caused them, maybe they felt they got overwhelmed or they ran out of skills or resources to handle the interaction, you can set up, you can program, hey, in this situation, this is how I will communicate that I'm overstressed and likely to blow a gasket. A tremendously helpful thing to do if you've got emotionally volatile people in your life is to have a way for them to communicate their redlining. If you just know that, it'll save you loads of grief. You go, oh, I know that you're redlining. I wish you the best. I'm going to be like at a distance, and I will wish you the best from there, and it's great. But set up, use the boundary setting as a time to set other boundaries that you want for things so that the relationship, whether that's a romantic or an interpersonal or a business, goes better in the future. It's a great time to get all that set up. Now, the other thing you can do, assuming that you really are unattached, somebody just ghosted you, and then, this is a weird curiosity. That's kind of a funny thing. I wonder what it was that caused them to lose contact. Now, is it something on their side in that they ran out of time? They lost my number. Their phone took a swim, something like that. Or is it an emotional on their side? They don't know how to deal with me, or they think that I'm just way too much, or I've violated a boundary, or they don't know how to kind of like redirect me or whatever. Whatever it is, they've got their thing, but it's not killing you. It's like, that's a curious thing. I would love to know what happened. Then when they maybe reconnect, reinitiate contact, then what you can do is just pick up where you left off. Now, you might have a curiosity once, probably I'd say like rebuild the strength of the connection. And then you might try making your guesses. Like if you had a list of like 3 or 5 things that you think you might have done, which were boundary violations for them or overwhelmed them in some way or something like that. You go, hey, there was like a month or 2 ago, I messaged you a few times. I don't know if you got that. I don't know, like I have no idea what was going on in your life. And I don't want to like presume, but I think it might be a useful learning experience for me to know, was it like a hardware problem with you? Was it like like your life was overwhelming problem? Was it something where I was being overwhelming myself and like something in the way I'm expressing myself was kind of not compatible with how you receive the world? That can be a great learning experience. But you can, if it's not bothering you, which is again probably not why you're listening to this, not why you're asking this question. But if it doesn't bother you, then you can learn at your own pace. But if it does bother you and they reconnect, now it's a big if they reconnect, and that time period, many people do reconnect, but that can be a short period or it can be years. And a lot of times, by the point you're talking to me, you probably tried all the desperate, fairly flamboyant, even possibly toxic ways to get a hold of somebody. Those your heart will probably run you through those options real quick. But when somebody makes contact again, it's important to set those boundaries. So if it was a hardware issue, phone took a swim, well, Part of that's going to be, how else can I get a hold of you? What's your roommate's number? Uh, are you in are you in contact with your parents? Can I get their number? Something like that. What's your address? You know, people may or may not be willing to share these things, but if it really is a their phone took a drink thing, and that's maybe the third time it's happened, maybe it's time to set up other ways of reaching them. But maybe it's an emotional thing, and you want to set up boundaries around that. Like, this is how we're going to interact. If you get overwhelmed by any part of this system, let me know that, hey, I can't deal with this right now. Or maybe you'll set a limit on how often you can text them or they can text you, and go, hey, I will be overwhelmed if you try to text me 3 times in one day. That's my limit. But set these boundaries and realize that you can pick up from where you left off, so long as you set those boundaries and stick with them. Anyway, thank you for calling the Charisma Help Desk, and I hope this helps you. Take care.